There's a widespread view regarding the origin of natural rights, which I believe is a flimsy and ultimately insufficient view for justifying the existence of natural rights. It is the so-called authority-based view of rights, popular both with the left and with the right today. The version preferred by the right is that the authority that grants rights to people is God. Even the great John Locke fell prey to this fallacy. The version preferred by the left is that the authority that grants individuals natural rights is the society, or the government, and its representatives affirmed by some kind of legitimate due process. The problem with the authority-based view of rights is that it does not suffice in ascertaining and securing objective, universal, stable, and permanent natural rights. After all, what the authority gives, the authority can take away, by that same authority by which it allegedly gave the rights. This is no secure basis for any kind of lasting, reliable understanding of rights. For instance, God can change his mind. He has been known to change his mind according to the scriptures of various monotheistic religions. He has even changed his mind about the desirability of the Great Flood, which he allegedly deeply regretted, according to the book of Genesis. Furthermore, anyone's say-so has no necessary truth value, and the authority-based view of rights is ultimately grounded on the say-so of some kind of allegedly authoritative entity. Now, you can call a particular entity a god, a king, or an elected representative. It does not matter. It does not add one bit of truth value to that authority's pronouncements. Glorified names are no substitute for the truth, nor do they give their bearer infallibility. However much the advocates of the authority-based view of rights might assert the contrary. To ground rights on say-so is to ground them arbitrarily, and therefore unstably. The only way to obtain a secure understanding of natural rights that cannot be revoked under any circumstances, is to recognize that natural rights do not come to human beings from any external source, be it a divine source or a human source. Natural rights, as the term might suggest, exist in human beings by virtue of their nature, i.e., by virtue of what human beings are. Rights do not come from any kind of external source. Indeed, the verb come from is simply not applicable to the concept of rights. Unfortunately, the English language is much more flexible in terms of what one can do with it than is reality, so it is possible to combine subjects and verbs in a nonsensical manner. For example, one could make a statement such as, virtue eats. Now, the verb eats, one will clearly recognize, is not applicable to a concept like virtue. It makes no sense to make a statement such as virtue eats. Similarly, it makes no sense to make a statement like rights come from anything, because the verb come from is just not applicable to the concept of rights. Rights do not come from, they simply are. Humans have rights by virtue of being human, by virtue of certain faculties that they have, including, according to some, their rationality, their ability to make choices regarding their actions, their volitional consciousness. They start having rights when they are conceived. They continue to have limited rights even after they die, hence the validity of inheritances and bequests. An individual can say, I will leave my property to X, and it is his right to say so and have his wish honored even after his life no longer exists. Furthermore, there is no necessary need for authority in order to enforce rights. Now granted, rights can be violated in this imperfect world of ours. It is possible for an individual to kill another individual in flagrant violation of his right to life. It is possible for some individuals to confiscate the property of other individuals in flagrant violations of their right to property. However, it does not follow that some single unitary authority must be the enforcer of all rights. Indeed, originally, every man, being himself the possessor of natural rights, is their first arbiter. He himself can decide which situations his rights apply to and when they have been violated. This is his original authority, as Locke describes it in The State of Nature. Now, sometimes it may be difficult to provide enforcement using that kind of model in practice. So sometimes, indeed quite frequently, people voluntarily make the choice of delegating the enforcement of their rights to some authority. However, this authority's power to enforce rights, to arbitrate disputes, and sometimes to use force in resolution of disputes that cannot be otherwise resolved, derives from that original delegation. This authority cannot arrogate to itself any kinds of powers other than those which have been explicitly delegated to it by every individual under its jurisdiction. So, there can be a place for authorities, such as governments, in adjudicating disputes and enforcing natural rights. But the choice to subject oneself to such a system must always be made willingly by each individual. And one can dispute, of course, what constitutes a willing choice. Political philosophers have been having that conversation for at least 4 centuries. And different advocates of natural rights will disagree as to what constitutes consent. However, it is a fundamental principle of natural rights that that kind of consent and that kind of delegation is always necessary. No authority can just spring up on its own and claim some external source, external to the individuals upon whom it exercises its jurisdiction, as the justification for its enforcement of somebody's alleged rights, or its violation of rights that actually exist. Furthermore, if it were true that a single unitary authority is necessary for the enforcement of rights, the advocate of such a position would, to be consistent, need to advocate global government. Indeed, there are many governments on the earth today. Neither government, none of these governments, have authority over any other government necessarily. So, does that create some kind of problem? Is it somehow wrong that we have almost 200 nation-states instead of just one in the entire world? Was it wrong earlier in history, when there were even smaller nation-states and city-states and principalities? Was there somehow some kind of greater injustice in having that kind of enforcement of rights, rather than the one that we have today? I would allege that it is not necessarily more unjust to have more authorities of different kinds and different scopes enforcing rights rather than to have fewer. It depends on the situation. It depends on the particular individuals claiming to be authorities, whether their authority is legitimate, whether their authority has been delegated to them, whether they actually exercise the powers that have been delegated to them and do not exceed the scope of those powers. Rights can be universal, they can be objective, they can be inalienable, without the need for an authority to originate the rights. Every person has natural rights. The question is, what does one do with them, and what does one do to protect and preserve them? And that is indeed the principal question of political philosophy, and it is a question whose resolution is essential for our time and for the peace, prosperity, and progress of humankind.